In a world buzzing with opinions and voices, there was one name that began to rise above the noise: Karoline Leavitt. She wasn't your average politician. Young, bold, and full of energy, she had quickly become someone people couldn't stop talking about. Her ideas were fresh, her speeches inspiring, and her determination unmatched. But as her popularity grew, so did the spotlight on her life. And not all of it was kind. Karoline came from humble beginnings. She grew up in a small town where life wasn't always easy. Her parents worked hard to make ends meet, and she learned early on what it meant to face challenges head-on. Those struggles shaped her into the person she was, a fighter who believed in standing up for others. That's why, when she stepped into politics, she didn't just talk about change, she promised to fight for it. But stepping into the political arena isn't easy, especially when you're new. Critics were quick to jump on her case. Some said she was too young, others claimed she lacked experience, and a few even dismissed her as someone who was all talk and no action. Among those critics was a journalist known for his sharp tongue and unapologetic style. He made it his mission to challenge anyone he thought didn't deserve the attention they were getting, and Karoline was squarely in his sights. The stage was set for a showdown, though neither of them knew it yet. It happened during a big political event, a summit packed with leaders, thinkers, and media personalities. The room buzzed with excitement as attendees gathered to hear speeches, share ideas, and debate the issues shaping the nation. Karoline was invited to speak about her vision for the future. Her presence alone drew curiosity. Some came to listen, eager to hear what she had to say. Others came ready to pick apart her words, hoping to find flaws in her arguments. As Karoline took the stage, the room quieted down. All eyes were on her. She stood tall, exuding confidence despite knowing that not everyone in the audience was rooting for her. With a warm smile, she began to speak. Her voice carried strength and conviction as she outlined her plans for reform, emphasizing unity, progress, and hope. She spoke passionately about creating opportunities for the underprivileged, improving education, and making healthcare accessible to all. Her words painted a picture of a brighter future, one she believed was possible if people worked together. While many in the audience nodded along, impressed by her clarity and vision, there was one person who wasn't buying it. Sitting toward the back of the room, notebook in hand, was the journalist who had been critical of her from the start. As Karoline spoke, he scribbled notes furiously, occasionally rolling his eyes or smirking at something she said. To him, her speech sounded like nothing more than lofty promises designed to win applause. He was convinced she wouldn't be able to deliver on any of it. When Karoline finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause. People cheered, clapping enthusiastically, clearly moved by her message. But amid the sea of approval, the journalist remained unmoved. In fact, he seemed almost irritated. When the Q&A session began, he wasted no time raising his hand. His expression was smug, his posture relaxed, as if he already knew exactly how this would go. The moderator called on him, and without missing a beat, he leaned forward, microphone in hand, ready to strike. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, his tone laced with sarcasm, "you've certainly given us quite the speech today. Very inspiring, I must say. But let's get real for a moment. Aren't most of your proposals just pie-in-the-sky ideas? How do we know you can actually deliver on these promises?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Karoline, waiting to see how she would respond. Would she stumble under the pressure? Would she lash out defensively? Or would she rise to the occasion? What happened next surprised everyone, including the journalist himself. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. All eyes were on Karoline as the journalist's words hung in the air. His question wasn't just a critique. It felt like a challenge, designed to rattle her and expose any cracks in her confidence. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Instead, she stood there, calm and composed, her expression unreadable. Some people might have taken that pause as hesitation, but those who knew her well, or even casually observed her, could tell it was something else entirely. It was the quiet before the storm. Karoline took a deep breath, her gaze steady. She looked directly at the journalist, not with anger or frustration, but with an intensity that made it clear she wasn't backing down. Then, instead of firing back right away, she did something unexpected. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and said simply, "Thank you for your question." The audience stirred slightly, unsure of what to make of her response. Was she about to dodge the issue? Or was this the calm before she delivered a knockout punch? Before addressing his comment directly, Karoline turned her attention to the crowd. Her voice softened, becoming more conversational, as if she were speaking to each person individually rather than a packed auditorium. "Let me ask all of you something," she began, her tone warm but firm. "How many of you believe our country is better off when we focus on problems instead of solutions?" She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. A few hands went up hesitantly while others exchanged uncertain glances. Karoline nodded slowly, acknowledging their responses. "Criticism has its place. It keeps us honest, pushes us to do better. But when criticism turns into mockery, it stops being constructive, and that's where we lose sight of what really matters: progress." Her voice grew stronger now, carrying a note of passion that resonated throughout the room. Mockery doesn't build bridges. It doesn't create opportunities or solve real-world problems. So yes, I welcome tough questions, I expect them. But let's not confuse skepticism with cynicism. By this point, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. People leaned forward in their seats, captivated by her words. Even some of the skeptics in the audience found themselves nodding along, unable to deny the truth in what she was saying. The journalist, however, sat frozen, his smug demeanor fading ever so slightly. He hadn't expected her to take control of the narrative so effortlessly, but Karoline wasn't done yet. She turned back to him, her gaze unwavering. "You asked if I can deliver on my promises. Let's talk about that." She paused for effect, letting the tension build. "Because here's the thing. I'm not here to entertain pundits or win popularity contests. I'm here because I care deeply about making a difference, and I've already started doing that." With that, she launched into specifics, citing examples of legislation she'd helped pass and initiatives she'd championed. She spoke about expanding access to affordable health care in underserved communities and pushing for programs that gave kids from low-income families a fair shot at quality education. Her delivery was smooth, confident, and backed by facts. Each example she provided painted a clearer picture of her track record, proving that her vision wasn't just theoretical, it was grounded in action. As she spoke, the journalist's pen hovered over his notebook, unused. For once he seemed unsure of how to respond. The room, meanwhile, erupted into applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from genuine admiration and respect. But Karoline wasn't content to leave it there. She wanted to drive her point home, to ensure everyone understood where she was coming from. "I didn't grow up with privilege," she continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "My family struggled, like so many others. I know what it's like to feel powerless, to watch the people you love work themselves to the bone just to keep food on the table. That's why I fight. For them, for you, for anyone who deserves a chance to succeed." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. You could hear it in every word she spoke, see it in the way she carried herself. This wasn't rehearsed rhetoric, it was raw honesty. And it struck a chord with everyone in the room, including the journalist, though he wouldn't admit it openly. By the time Karoline finished speaking, the energy in the auditorium had transformed completely. What had started as a tense confrontation had turned into a powerful moment of connection and clarity. As the applause died down, Karoline glanced back at the journalist. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a look of contemplation. Whether he liked it or not, she had flipped the script, turning his attempt to undermine her into an opportunity to showcase her strength and authenticity. The audience, too, seemed to sense the significance of what had just happened. They weren't just applauding her answers, they were applauding her resilience, her ability to rise above negativity and stay focused on the bigger picture. And while The journalist may have intended to walk away with the upper hand. It was clear to everyone in that room who had truly won the day. Karoline Leavitt had proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that she wasn't just another politician trying to make headlines. She was someone willing to stand up, speak out, and fight for what she believed in, even when the odds were stacked against her. The room was electric, charged with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Karoline's words had struck a nerve, not just with the journalist who had challenged her, but with everyone in attendance. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The journalist sat there, his pen resting motionless on his notebook, as if he'd been caught off guard by the sheer force of her response. He wasn't alone. Even seasoned reporters and political analysts in the audience exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Karoline didn't let the silence linger for too long. She knew she had momentum on her side, and she wasn't about to waste it. Instead of ending her rebuttal there, she leaned into the moment, choosing to share a deeply personal story, one that would leave an indelible mark on everyone listening. Her voice softened, becoming more intimate, as if she were opening up to a close friend rather than addressing hundreds of people. "I want to take you back to my childhood," she began, her tone steady but filled with emotion. "I grew up in a small town where life wasn't always easy. My parents worked 2 jobs each just to put food on the table. I remember nights when I'd hear my mom crying quietly in the kitchen because the bills were piling up, and there wasn't enough money to cover them. I remember helping my dad fix things around the house, not because we wanted to, but because we couldn't afford to replace what was broken." Her words painted a vivid picture, one that resonated with anyone who had ever faced hardship. She didn't embellish or dramatize her story. Instead, she spoke plainly, letting the weight of her experiences speak for themselves. "There were days when I felt invisible, like no matter how hard I tried, the world wouldn't notice. But those moments taught me something important. They taught me resilience. They showed me that even in the toughest times you can find strength you didn't know you had." As she spoke, the room seemed to shrink. It was no longer a crowded auditorium filled with strangers. It felt like a circle of trust, where everyone was connected by shared humanity. Some attendees nodded along, their expressions thoughtful, while others looked down, perhaps reflecting on their own struggles. Even the journalists, who were usually more focused on dissecting sound bites than connecting emotionally, found themselves drawn into her narrative. "But here's the thing," Karoline continued, her voice growing firmer now. "I didn't enter politics to relive those hard times. I came here to change them, for myself, for my family, and for millions of others who feel like they're fighting an uphill battle every single day. When I talk about policies that improve education, healthcare, and economic opportunities, I'm not just throwing out ideas. I'm speaking from a place of experience. I've seen what happens when people are left behind, and I refuse to let that happen anymore." Her passion was undeniable, and it radiated through every word she said. By this point, the journalist who had challenged her earlier looked visibly uncomfortable. His initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by a quiet unease. It was clear that he hadn't anticipated this kind of response. He had expected to rattle her, to expose weaknesses in her arguments, but instead, he had unleashed a tidal wave of authenticity and conviction that left him, and everyone else, speechless. Karoline paused briefly, allowing her words to settle over the room. Then, with a calm but piercing gaze, she turned back to the journalist. "You asked if I can deliver on my promises. Let me answer that question with facts. In the past year alone, I've worked tirelessly to pass legislation that expands access to affordable health care. I've fought for programs that provide scholarships to students who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford college. These aren't empty slogans, they're tangible results, and yes, there's still more work to do. But I won't apologize for dreaming big or aiming high, because if we don't dream, we'll never achieve." The room erupted into applause, again louder and more sustained this time. People clapped not just out of politeness, but out of genuine respect and admiration. Some even stood up, giving her a standing ovation. It was a rare moment in politics, one where rhetoric gave way to raw honesty, and where a leader's humanity shone brighter than any title or position. For the journalist, the moment was humbling. He had walked into the event ready to challenge Karoline, armed with skepticism and sarcasm. But now, sitting there under the weight of her response, he realized he had underestimated her. She wasn't just a politician with talking points, she was someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. And while he might not have agreed with everything she stood for, he couldn't deny the sincerity in her voice or the depth of her commitment. As the applause began to fade, Karoline took a step back from the podium, signaling that she was done. Her message had been delivered, and it had landed with precision. The audience buzzed with energy, eager to discuss what they had just witnessed. Conversations broke out across the room, with people sharing their thoughts and reactions. Some praised her composure, others highlighted her policy achievements. But everyone agreed on one thing. Karoline Leavitt had handled herself with grace, intelligence, and unshakable resolve. And as for the journalist, he quietly packed up his notebook, avoiding eye contact with those around him. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning whether his approach had been fair or effective. While he would later try to downplay the encounter, in his reporting the truth was undeniable. Karoline had turned his attempt to mock her into a defining moment that showcased her strength and authenticity. By the time the event ended, the story of Karoline's response had already begun to spread. Social media lit up with clips of her speech, and headlines praised her poise under pressure. What started as a confrontation had become a testament to the power of staying true to oneself, and a reminder that real leadership isn't about silencing critics, but about addressing them with dignity and purpose. The event ended, but the ripple effects of Karoline's response were only beginning to unfold. As people filed out of the auditorium, the buzz was palpable. Conversations bubbled up everywhere, near the exits, in the hallways, even outside, the building where clusters of attendees gathered to share their thoughts. Some replayed her key moments in their minds, marveling at how she had turned a potentially hostile situation into an opportunity to connect. Others debated whether the journalist would admit he had underestimated her, or try to brush it off as if nothing happened. Karoline herself remained calm and collected as she stepped off the stage. She wasn't one to dwell on victories or defeats. Instead, she focused on what mattered most, the message she had delivered and the impact it might have. Still, she couldn't help but notice the shift in energy around her. People approached her, not just for photos or autographs, but to thank her. One woman, clutching her purse tightly, told Karoline that her story about growing up in hardship resonated deeply with her own life. "You gave me hope," the woman said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you." Moments like these reminded Karoline why she had chosen this path in the first place. It wasn't about fame or power. It was about making a difference, however small, in people's lives. And while she knew not everyone would agree with her policies or support her vision, she also knew that genuine connection could bridge divides. That belief fueled her every step forward. Meanwhile, the journalist found himself in an unfamiliar position, grappling with doubt. Backstage, away from the crowd, he sat alone at a table littered with empty coffee cups and crumpled notes. His notebook lay open in front of him, but he hadn't written anything new since Karoline's speech. Try as he might, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted during those few minutes on stage. For years, he had prided himself on his ability to expose flaws in politicians' arguments, to cut through the spin and get to the truth. But now he wondered if he had gone too far this time, if his sarcasm had crossed the line from critique to cruelty. A colleague interrupted his thoughts, pulling up a chair beside him. "Well," the colleague said with a wry grin, "that didn't go quite the way you planned, did it?" The journalist forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I don't know what happened," he admitted after a pause. "I thought I'd throw her off balance, make her stumble. Instead, well, you saw what happened." His voice trailed off, and for once his usual bravado was nowhere to be found. His colleague nodded sympathetically. "She handled it brilliantly, didn't she?" I mean, I've interviewed dozens of politicians and most of them either dodge tough questions or lose their cool entirely. But her? She owned that moment. You can't deny that. Reluctantly, the journalist agreed. There was no denying it. Karoline had been prepared, composed, and authentic in a way that left little room for criticism. What bothered him more, though, was the nagging sense that maybe he had missed the bigger picture. He had walked into the summit ready to challenge her credentials, to highlight what he saw as gaps in her experience. But instead of dismantling her arguments, he had inadvertently given her a platform to showcase her strengths. Worse still, he realized that by mocking her, he had come across as dismissive, not just of her, but of the very real struggles she spoke about. As the evening wore on, social media began lighting up with reactions. Clips of Karoline's exchange with the journalist spread like wildfire, drawing comments from all corners of the internet. Supporters praised her poise and authenticity, calling her response inspiring and refreshing. Critics, meanwhile, tried to downplay the incident, accusing her detractors of being overly harsh. Even some of the journalist's peers weighed in, acknowledging that Karoline had handled herself exceptionally well under pressure. For Karoline, the attention was both flattering and overwhelming. She didn't seek validation from viral moments or trending hashtags, but she recognized the value of the platform they provided. If sharing her story could inspire others to keep pushing for change, then she welcomed it. Still, she made a point to remind herself, and her team, that the real work happened behind the scenes, away from the cameras and headlines. Speeches and debates were important, but they meant nothing without action to back them up. The next morning, news outlets picked up the story, analyzing every detail of the confrontation. Headlines ranged from "Karoline Leavitt shuts down critic with grace" to "Journalist learns hard lesson after mocking rising star." While much of the coverage focused on the drama of the moment, some reporters dug deeper, exploring the substance behind Karoline's words. They highlighted her legislative achievements, her advocacy for underserved communities, and her commitment to staying grounded despite the pressures of public life. One article stood out in particular. Written by a seasoned political analyst, it framed the incident not as a clash between two individuals, but as a reflection of broader societal tensions. What we witnessed yesterday wasn't just a politician defending herself against criticism, the piece read. It was a reminder of why empathy matters in leadership. Karoline Leavitt didn't just answer a question. She connected with people. She reminded us that policies aren't abstract concepts. They're lifelines for those who need them most. The journalist, meanwhile, retreated from the spotlight temporarily. He avoided interviews and declined to comment further on the incident, citing a need to reflect on his approach. Privately, he wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt embarrassed by how easily Karoline had disarmed him. On the other, he couldn't ignore the lessons he had learned from the experience. Perhaps, he thought, there was a better way to hold leaders accountable, one that prioritized constructive dialogue over cutting remarks. In the days that followed, Karoline continued her work with renewed determination. The incident hadn't changed her goals, but it had reinforced her belief in the importance of leading with integrity. She understood that criticism came with the territory, but she also knew that responding with grace and honesty could turn challenges into opportunities. Her team joked that she should trademark her calm under pressure demeanor, but she brushed it off with a laugh. "It's not about me," she told them. "It's about doing right by the people who trust us to fight for them." And so, the story of that day became more than just a viral moment. It became a testament to resilience, authenticity, and the power of staying true to oneself. For Karoline, it was proof that even in the face of negativity, kindness, and conviction could shine through. And for the journalist, it served as a humbling reminder that sometimes the toughest questions lead to the most valuable answers. The aftermath of the summit wasn't just a fleeting moment in the news cycle. It sparked conversations that lingered for weeks. People couldn't stop talking about it. Social media threads, talk shows, and even casual chats at coffee shops revolved around Karoline's response to the journalist's challenge. What made her stand out wasn't just her eloquence or her ability to think on her feet. It was the way she had turned a potentially hostile exchange into something meaningful. She didn't dodge the question, lash out, or retreat into defensiveness. Instead, she leaned into vulnerability, sharing pieces of her life that resonated deeply with so many others. For some, her story about growing up in hardship felt like a mirror reflecting their own struggles. One viewer wrote online, "I've been there, watching my parents work themselves to exhaustion, feeling invisible because no one seemed to care. When Karoline talked about those nights listening to her mom cry, I felt like she was speaking directly to me, like she got it." That sentiment echoed across countless comments, posts, and messages. It wasn't just politicians or policy wonks who were paying attention anymore. It was everyday people who saw themselves in her journey. Karoline noticed this shift almost immediately. Her inbox flooded with emails from individuals sharing their stories. A retired teacher wrote to thank her for advocating for better funding in public schools, saying, "You reminded me why I spent 30 years teaching despite the low pay and long hours. Kids deserve champions like you." A single mother described how Karoline's healthcare initiatives had helped her access treatment for her child's chronic illness. "Before I thought leaders only cared about numbers," she wrote. "But hearing you speak made me realize you actually see us. You see our pain, our hopes, our dreams." These messages weren't just affirmations of support, they were reminders of why Karoline kept pushing forward, even when the road got tough. Politics could be brutal and criticism often came without mercy. But these personal connections fueled her resolve. They reminded her that behind every statistic, policy proposal, or legislative battle were real people whose lives hung in the balance. And if she could make a difference, even for one person, it was worth it. Meanwhile, the journalist found himself wrestling with an internal storm. He had always prided himself on being sharp, insightful, and unflinching in his pursuit of truth. But now, he questioned whether his approach had gone too far. Was mockery ever justified? Did sarcasm serve a purpose beyond alienating the very people he claimed to hold accountable? These questions gnawed at him, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own methods. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment scrolling through social media, he stumbled upon a thread discussing the incident. Most of the comments praised Karoline, calling her response classy and powerful. But one comment stood out. Not because it attacked him, but because it challenged him. "Sure, the journalist was harsh," the commenter wrote, "but maybe we need to rethink what accountability looks like. Criticism doesn't have to tear someone down to be effective. Maybe it can build them and us up instead." That simple observation struck a chord. The journalist realized that his role wasn't just to critique or expose flaws, it was to foster understanding. Mockery might grab attention, but it rarely inspired change. If anything, it created walls where bridges should have been. For the first time in years, he began to consider whether there was another way. A way that prioritized empathy over cynicism, curiosity over judgment. Determined to learn from the experience, he decided to reach out to a few colleagues whose work he admired. One of them, a veteran reporter known for her balanced and thoughtful coverage, agreed to meet him for coffee. Over steaming cups, they discussed the state of journalism today, the pressures, the pitfalls, and the possibilities. "We're living in a time when trust in media is at an all-time low," she said gently. "People don't just want answers, they want authenticity. They want to know that we're listening, not just lecturing." Her words stayed with him long after their meeting ended. Slowly but surely, he began to adjust his approach. Instead of leading with sarcasm or skepticism, he started asking tougher, more nuanced questions. Questions designed to uncover solutions, rather than highlight problems. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the impact his work could have. Back in the political arena, Karoline continued to gain momentum. The viral moment hadn't changed her core mission, but it had amplified her voice in ways she hadn't anticipated. Invitations poured in for interviews, panel discussions, and community events. At each appearance, she carried the same message. Progress required collaboration, not confrontation. "We don't have to agree on everything," she often said, "but we do have to agree on one thing, that everyone deserves a fair shot at success." Her consistency earned her respect, even from unlikely corners. Some of her fiercest critics softened their stance, acknowledging her willingness to engage openly and honestly. Others remained skeptical, but even they admitted that her authenticity was hard to ignore. "She's not perfect," one columnist wrote, "but she's refreshingly real. In a world full of spin, that counts for something." As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that day at the summit continued to spread. For Karoline, it reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling. Sharing her experiences hadn't just humanized her, it had created a bridge between her and the people she sought to serve. For the journalist, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by reflection and growth. And for everyone else, it served as a reminder that leadership isn't about avoiding criticism. It's about rising above it with grace and purpose. The end. The story wasn't just about a clash between two individuals. It was about the moments that define us, the lessons we learn, and the choices we make moving forward. Karoline's stunning response hadn't silenced her critics, nor had it erased the challenges ahead. But it had proven one thing unequivocally. When faced with negativity, kindness and conviction could leave a lasting impression, one that inspired others to believe in the possibility of change. The ripple effects of that day at the summit weren't confined to just Karoline or the journalist. They touched lives far beyond the walls of the auditorium. People who had watched the exchange online, read about it in newspapers, or heard snippets of it on the radio found themselves reflecting on their own lives and choices. It was as if the moment had tapped into something universal, a shared longing for authenticity in a world often dominated by noise and posturing. For many, Karoline's response became more than just a rebuttal. It became a blueprint for handling adversity with grace. A young college student named Alex, not his real name, posted a video on social media sharing how her words had inspired him. "I've always struggled with self-doubt," he admitted, sitting in front of a plain white wall, his voice trembling slightly. "Whenever someone criticizes me, I either shut down or lash out. But watching Karoline handle that journalist made me realize there's another way. You can stand your ground without losing your cool. You can face criticism head-on and still come out stronger." His video resonated deeply, racking up thousands of views within hours. Commenters flooded the thread with their own stories, about bosses who belittled them, teachers who dismissed their ideas, friends who betrayed their trust. Each story was unique, but they all carried a common thread. Moments when vulnerability turned into strength. Someone even shared an old quote they attributed to Karoline from one of her earlier speeches. "When life knocks you down, don't let it break you. Let it build you." That sentiment seemed to capture what so many people were feeling. Life throws challenges, big and small, and how we respond defines not just our character, but also the impact we have on others. For Karoline, responding to the journalist wasn't about proving herself right. It was about showing up authentically even when the stakes felt high, and that lesson rippled outward, reaching corners she never imagined. Meanwhile, the journalist began to notice subtle changes in how people interacted with him. At first, he assumed the incident would blow over quickly, that people would forget about it once the next big headline rolled around. But to his surprise, the opposite happened. Strangers approached him during interviews or public appearances, asking questions like, "What did you learn from that day?" Or, "How do you feel about your role now?" At first, these queries caught him off guard, leaving him unsure of how to respond. Over time, though, he started to see them as opportunities to grow, to connect, and to acknowledge his missteps openly. One such encounter took place at a local bookstore where he was promoting a new article series. After his talk, a middle-aged woman approached him, clutching a copy of the magazine. "I read your piece about accountability," she said softly. "It was good, honest. But I wanted to ask, has your perspective changed since the summit? Because I think most of us are trying to figure out how to hold leaders accountable without tearing them apart." Her question hit home. For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. Then, deciding to be candid, he nodded. "You're right," he said. "I used to think being tough meant being harsh. But after that day, I realized toughness doesn't have to mean cruelty. Accountability isn't about tearing someone down. It's about challenging them to rise up. I'm still learning, but I hope my work reflects that shift." The woman smiled warmly before walking away, leaving him with a sense of quiet satisfaction. These interactions weren't easy. They forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, but they were necessary. Slowly, he began rebuilding trust, not just with his audience, but with himself. Back in her corner of the world, Karoline faced her own set of challenges. The viral moment brought attention, yes, but it also brought scrutiny. Critics dissected every word she said, searching for inconsistencies or weaknesses. Some accused her of using emotional appeals to sidestep substantive debates. Others questioned whether her policies could truly deliver on their promises. The pressure mounted, testing her patience and resolve. But instead of letting the negativity wear her down, Karoline doubled down on her commitment to transparency. She invited skeptics to town hall meetings, encouraging them to voice their concerns directly. She answered tough questions honestly, admitting when she didn't have all the answers and promising to work harder to find solutions. "I'm not here to convince anyone I'm perfect," she told a packed room during one such event. "I'm here because I believe in progress, and progress doesn't happen unless we listen to each other, even when it's hard." Her efforts paid off. While not everyone agreed with her, even her detractors acknowledged her willingness to engage. One opponent wrote in a blog post, "I may not support everything she stands for, but I respect her dedication to dialogue. Too many politicians avoid tough conversations altogether. Karoline leans into them, and that takes guts." As months passed, the initial buzz surrounding the summit faded, replaced by quieter, steadier progress. Karoline continued championing causes close to her heart, working tirelessly behind the scenes to push legislation forward. The journalist, meanwhile, carved out a niche for himself as someone unafraid to reflect publicly on his growth. Together, albeit indirectly, they reminded people that change begins with reflection, and that no one is above learning from their mistakes. By the end of the year, the story of their exchange had transformed from a single dramatic moment into a symbol of resilience and transformation. It showed that leadership isn't about avoiding criticism, it's about facing it head-on while staying true to your values. It proved that even in a divided world, empathy and honesty can bridge gaps. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that every challenge, no matter how daunting, carries within it the seeds of opportunity. For Karoline, the journey reinforced her belief in the power of perseverance. For the journalist, it marked the start of a new chapter defined by humility and growth. And for everyone else, it served as a reminder that sometimes the most impactful moments aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones that catch us off guard, forcing us to dig deep and discover what truly matters. As the months rolled by, the impact of that pivotal day at the summit continued to unfold in unexpected ways. What had started as a heated exchange between Karoline and the journalist evolved into something far greater, a testament to the power of resilience, growth, and human connection. It wasn't just about who won or lost the argument. It was about how both individuals handled themselves afterward and how their actions inspired others. For Karoline, the aftermath brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. Her newfound visibility opened doors she hadn't anticipated. Community groups invited her to speak at local events, schools asked her to address students about leadership, and advocacy organizations sought her partnership for grassroots campaigns. She embraced these moments not as platforms to boost her profile, but as chances to connect with people on a deeper level. At each event, she shared the same message. Progress isn't made by one person standing alone. It's made when we stand together. One particularly memorable moment came during a visit to a small town struggling with unemployment and crumbling infrastructure. Residents gathered in a modest community center, some skeptical of politicians, others desperate for hope. When Karoline stepped up to speak, she didn't launch into a polished speech. Instead, she listened, really listened to their stories. A factory worker talked about losing his job after decades of service. A single mother described the struggle of raising kids while working 2 minimum wage jobs. An elderly man voiced frustration over potholed roads that made it hard for him to get around. When it was her turn to respond, Karoline spoke plainly, without jargon or pretense. "I hear you," she said firmly. "Your struggles are real, and they matter. I can't promise quick fixes, but I can promise this. I'll fight alongside you. We'll find solutions together." The room erupted in applause, not because she offered easy answers, but because she acknowledged their pain and promised solidarity. For many in the audience, it was the first time they felt truly seen by someone in power. Meanwhile, the journalist found himself navigating uncharted territory. After years of building a reputation as someone unafraid to challenge authority, he now faced the daunting task of redefining his role. He knew he couldn't erase the past, nor did he want to. But he could use the experience as a catalyst for change. Slowly, he began shifting his focus from tearing people down to lifting them up through thoughtful, constructive journalism. His turning point came during an assignment covering a rural healthcare crisis. As he interviewed doctors, nurses, and patients, he realized the story wasn't just about statistics. It was about people fighting against impossible odds. One nurse, overwhelmed by long hours and limited resources, told him, "We're doing our best, but sometimes it feels like no one cares." That comment stuck with him, prompting him to rethink how he framed his reporting. Instead of highlighting failures, he chose to spotlight efforts to create change. His article, titled "Heroes in Hard Times," celebrated the resilience of healthcare workers and sparked donations and volunteer sign-ups from across the country. Word of his evolving approach spread, earning him both praise and criticism. Some colleagues accused him of going soft, while others applauded his willingness to adapt. But for the journalist, the feedback mattered less than the sense of purpose he'd rediscovered. "If my work can inspire action instead of anger," he reflected in a personal blog post, "then maybe I'm finally doing it right." Back in the political arena, Karoline faced pushback from opponents determined to undermine her progress. Critics questioned her decisions, attacked her policies, and even tried to discredit her character. Yet through it all, she remained steadfast, refusing to let negativity dictate her path. Her team often joked that she had developed a superpower for staying calm under pressure, but those closest to her knew it wasn't magic, it was discipline. Every morning, before diving into meetings or debates, she reminded herself why she had chosen this journey in the first place. To make life better for people who felt forgotten, her perseverance paid off in tangible ways. Legislation she championed passed with bipartisan support, bringing much-needed reforms to education and healthcare systems. Grassroots movements inspired by her message gained momentum, empowering communities to advocate for themselves. Even, some former skeptics admitted they admired her tenacity, calling her a force to be reckoned with. By the end of the year, the story of the summit had transformed from a fleeting headline into a lasting legacy. For Karoline, it became a reminder that authenticity resonates more deeply than perfection. For the journalist, it marked the beginning of a journey toward accountability and empathy. And for everyone else, it served as proof that even in divisive times, moments of grace and courage can unite us. Looking back, neither Karoline nor the journalist would say the encounter was easy. It forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their roles in society. But it also taught them valuable lessons about humility, resilience, and the importance of listening. Both emerged stronger, not because they avoided criticism, but because they embraced it as a chance to grow. In the end, the true measure of their impact wasn't in headlines or viral clips. It was in the lives they touched along the way. Young activist credited Karoline's speech with inspiring her to run for local office. A teacher thanked the journalist for shining a light on struggles in underserved schools. Countless others shared stories of how the moment reminded them to lead with kindness, even in the face of adversity. And so, what began as a clash between two individuals grew into something bigger, a testament to the power of rising above negativity and choosing connection over conflict. It showed that leadership isn't about being flawless, it's about being human. It proved that every challenge carries within it the potential for transformation, if we have the courage to embrace it.